Are you guys, are you in the middle of a tour right now?
Kind of. We're like, yeah, pretty much. We're doing like weekend shows right now. So we started a few weeks ago and we're going till like Christmas.
Had it been a while since you had been?
Yeah. I guess at least a year. Yeah.
Did we go last year for anything? I thought we only had, since the pandemic, I thought we only had a couple of summer festivals and a few gigs. Why? We weren't on tour last year, were we?
We did a whole run around Original Classic for sure. Like we did a whole club run like what we're doing now.
Wait, this is going to sound stupid, but did Original Classic come out after the pandemic?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Wow. My timing is way off. Those 2 years have really messed with me. Okay.
Dude.
Yeah. All right.
Well,
that makes sense.
It's a combination, I think, of like, I think as you get older, it's harder to figure out, what year and what day and all. Like time is just a weirder thing as you get older. But then, it's weird too, like looking back at your own history, because it sounds funny, like, right? Like when did an album that I made come out? But I think looking back at it, it's weird because you're so focused on it when you're making it and touring it. But then in order to do what you guys do, I think at a certain point, you kind of have to, discard it in a way. You know what I mean? Like just put it in the archive so you can be present for the next thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah, totally. The day after we deliver it, I don't want to see it again or hear it again.
Greg was like earlier to this week, he's like, guys, I think like, should we go out and celebrate the album? Like have dinner? And I'm like, we're like, yeah, that'd probably be something we should actually like, and we still haven't figured out how to do it yet. Our schedules are still crazy. And it's like, it's really hard to kind of, it's like you work on the album, you finish it, and then you're like already kind of looking ahead to the next thing. And you forget to actually just appreciate what you just did. And I don't know if that's like everyone's like that or if it's just us, but I find it, it's kind of hard to kind of just like, even the album coming out tomorrow, it's like, or tonight, I guess, it's still not really registered to me.
Right.
In a weird way. Like, I don't know if you guys feel anything, Greg or Toon, like either. Like, it's just this weird kind of like, I'm just thinking about the next thing I have to do, like the post you have to do. Like you're working. So you don't really get to sit back and just like appreciate the work you've done, I guess, I'm
going to listen to it tomorrow. I haven't listened to it. I've purposely not listened to it since we finished it.
Well, here's a question. Can you go back and listen to older stuff you've put out at this point with some distance? Now that it's been a while, can you go back and appreciate it more as a listener, as a fan?
I can, like, I actually, funny enough, like I was looking for some footage of ours to post for a piece of content. I stumbled across like an old N Krates live set when we played as a band. I think it was during one of our tours that we taped, and I watched the whole thing, and I was actually like, not bad. Like, and I was like, it was really musical, and like I thought the energy was good, and it was like way back from like 2016 or something. And I think the other day I just did a run. I go for runs in the morning and I put on the Original Classic album and played that front to back and enjoyed that. And then I put on the solo EP a couple times and just listened to that just to, and it's kind of cool. I don't mind it, like I kind of enjoy it personally.
Are there any on that note? Because sometimes I'll go back and listen to older things that I made, and it's almost like I'm listening to a stranger. Like sometimes it's hard for me to connect with the older version, and even sometimes in a good way, where I was like, oh, I came up with, this is a great idea. Like I did this. It's like been long enough that I don't even remember how I did something. Like in a weird way, I'm like, am I worse now? You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you're talking about. We did that over the pandemic. Matisse and I started to do like, we did some Twitch stream stuff and started listening back to stuff. And it was like, some stuff you're like, I don't know. And then other stuff you're like, oh, that's actually pretty good. Or like, Who made that?
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
But I know what you mean about like, did I get worse?
Yeah, totally. It just, it's a funny thing, man. I sometimes feel you're so many different people over the course of your life. You know what I mean? And I actually wanted to ask you guys this because I had forgotten when you guys first did this podcast, I had forgotten how close to the start of the podcast it was. You guys were actually the 5th episode I had ever done of this. And, now it's like 330 some 6 years later, which is crazy for me to think about. But if you guys think back to who you were 6 years ago, say, which I think might have even been before your first album or somewhere around the first album. So in that time, like, who were those guys? Super open question. But like, if you look back on those young guys, like, who were they? Are you the same person? How has your perspective changed on what you're doing? Super open question. No wrong answer, but whatever you think of, I'm just curious.
Interesting.
We drank a lot more. That I've noticed from the two. If you see Greg and I on tour now compared to Greg and I and Tune on tour 7 years ago, it's different people. It's like completely different. And I think right now, because I kind of put together the social media stuff, like file a lot of it. So when we're putting content out, so I've had the privilege and the luxury and the pain to kind of go through all our old stuff. And I see not only like who we were, but the clothes we wore
right.
and stuff like that. And the different trends we were in. I think what I like looking back on is one thing we're our own worst critics. Like I know most of us probably won't go back and listen to our own stuff, but I actually find when I go back and listen to our old stuff, I'm proud to say that there's a level of musicality that has been there from day one that I can sense even from all the weird genres we've mixed around to, that I'm like, we've always had this identity for musicality and intelligence in our music that I can still see even from like our earliest like records. And I'm kind of like, and I could almost even study, I'm like, oh, that's when we were into these type of chords or we into these type of sounds. But there, you can see the wheels turning in our head of why we went that way. And it's kind of cool to see that, because then you don't feel so bad about the album you're working on now and thinking, oh, it's the worst thing ever. Because, back then you thought the same thing about that album. And, it's always the same circle that we have the same thoughts in our head. And it's kind of the whole creative system. So the cool thing about where we're at now is I could tell on the end of when we were kind of finishing up our stuff and like the trappier stuff, is we were getting a lot more musical than the genre would allow us to be. And it was starting to get we were getting very bored and kind of frustrated, because it's like you couldn't put any more innovation into that scene. It was starting to just get smaller and smaller. And we were starting to get I think one of the albums we were starting to just get we were just dying to figure out how to do something different. It was like, how do we do this in this trap kind of scale? And it was very difficult to do. Whereas now, I think there's still rules with what we're doing now with house music, but there's a bit more flexibility and maturity there that you can kind of, go, okay, yeah, there's a bit more room to grow here. And there's more genres that you can dip into to allow us to be musical. So that was one thing that really stood out to me going back and listening to some of our other stuff. Especially with songwriting, like songwriting and trap. I remember it was really hard for us to do that. Trying to make songs and can we figure out how to put a melody and a hook and a bridge and still do a drop and they dance to? And I was like, that would take us hours, And now we've got 5 songs on this new record, they go right into that groove, and we're still trying to figure it out, but it just lends itself a little bit easier with kind of a house groove and a dance groove like that, rather than a hip hop trap groove.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, part of it too, right, is that back in those trap days, not only was it how do we write a song with a chord progression and a structure and a drop and all that, but also then we play it live, right? And how do we make that go off as well? So you're juggling a lot of plates that way. Plenty of stuff to talk about with the new album. One thing I noticed on it is there's sort of a sense of just fun about it. There's sort of a sense of there's like a sense of ease, I guess. Like it just feels very confident, I guess, in a way that it doesn't feel overworked. It doesn't feel overthought. It feels just kind of like everything's in its right place, but not done to death. You know what I mean? Does that make sense for your experience of making it?
Yeah, totally. I think so. I mean, that's my perspective on it for sure. I think it sounds very deliberate. It sounds like the most deliberate stuff we've made. And I just think everything sounds like there was like thought and care put into it on a different level, at least from my perspective, at least from my head. Because, I just think, the choices were really intentional. We wanted to make something really fun, but we wanted it to be like really soulful and have like good bones to it. We didn't want it to be, we wanted it to just be something that was like very well made, but didn't take itself too seriously. Whereas I feel like there has been some stuff in the past where I listen back and I'm like, this is so dramatic. I'm like, this is too, I don't know, like, and not that we're opposed to that, but I liked the feeling of lightness and like fun on this, but mixed with like rigorous execution of that idea. I think I'm like, that's what I get from it. And I'm a fan of that, you know?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think talking about that idea of like, oh, this is so dramatic. I think it's, again, like you said, not that there's anything wrong with that, but I've certainly fallen into the trap sometimes of really wanting to make some, putting too much into something, whether it's, too much drama or too much technicality or just too many pieces, too many elements in a song, just as kind of an exercise, or because you feel like, if I can pull this off, it's going to be impressive, or maybe even just I need to make this more complicated in order for it to stand out or in order to compete or whatever it is, when in reality, almost every time the actual exercise that's going to accomplish that is doing the opposite, right? It's like, sure, throw a bunch of stuff in there and then see how much you can take out and still have an effective song, right?
Yeah, reductiveness. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of restraint as well. Like you're constantly, when you're doing production, you're trying to push yourself to be better as a producer and a writer. So like having the restraint is also, something that has to be there. Like when to like pull it out to be nothing. And it's cool though. Like I do like throwing a lot of stuff in and then pulling stuff out, and then you get the happy accidents of combinations,
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the best music to me is all super simple. The best music has like a few elements or one element that sticks in your head. And especially with dance music, but even like kind of every music, it's like a good song is just like a few elements. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think, I feel like I feel like some of our past stuff that felt like the kitchen sink was getting thrown at stuff, maybe to mask that the idea wasn't always there. Not in every case, but like sometimes, and sometimes I think we would have a really good idea, but we threw too much at it and it might have just been a bit too overdone. So I feel like that's what we kind of nailed on this, was the simplicity plus the really good ideas that can kind of stand on their own, I think.
Well, tell me if this resonates with you, because I was listening to the album and I wrote this down that, listening to it, there's certainly you can hear some 90s influences, maybe some hip house, some like older styles of dance music. that you've taken and updated. There is a sense of fun that runs through it. But what stuck out to me is that as opposed to sort of reproducing those styles or just, going back and kind of like making your version of it, what felt new to me was it was all of those records. When I think about like the classic 90s house records, hip house, that whole genre, there's a few elements, right? Like there's the combination of styles, even back then, that I think you guys have always been very good at doing, sort of hybridizing your influences. But a lot of the older songs, I think there's a certain dusty quality, a certain grit in a lot of those records. And what was interesting to me, I don't know if you agree, you tell me, but I felt like you had sort of taken that template, but then the INTENSION album, to me, sounded very clean. And it was like taking a lot of these ideas, influences, sounds. It was almost like somebody took like a power washer to like old house music. You know what I mean?
It's very true.
I really like accurate. That. Like I just never, it sounds like kind of a little nuance, but at least for me, I was like, this is why this feels really unique to me.
Yeah, we wanted it to be able to be played with like current music. Like we wanted it to sound like current music. Current music's so loud and clear. The mixes are so clean and crisp now. And it's like, it's hard to play a lot of those older records unless you're just playing all those older records and it's fitting in that landscape. But if you're playing like newer club stuff that's really well mixed, and it's not like newer club stuff that's like a real throwbacky vibe, I think the mixes are so, there's different ways that we can get into all that stuff, but like, I think it's just stuff is so loud and clean and clear now. And that's the stuff that hits the hardest. And we are about that. Like we are about kind of stuff being able to give you the feeling of that old stuff, but also like be able to be played on like a really big stage and still like stand up. I think that was like a tightrope that we are constantly trying to walk with this album for sure.
Well, I saw a quote from you, Greg, in I think some interview or something, that you were saying that you thought of Keys and Krates, and I don't know when this was from, but you thought of Keys and Krates in general as dance music made from an outsider's point of view. Yeah. And I don't know if you would still sign on to that statement, but I think it does go into some of what you're talking about there, which is I've always felt like your guys' perspective on dance music and on what you do is like you make sure that it can fit in where it needs to fit in, but that's never really the goal of it. Mm-hmm. Like it's not trying to be part of any particular scene or sound exactly.
Yeah, totally. I think I don't think we like it when things sound like they fit too neatly in any box. So we need stuff to kind of be a little bit, just feel like it's sitting in its own space. I think for all of us to be excited about it. But also I do think outsiders for sure, but I do think we're like very aware of what's going on, in the music that we're making, and which allowed us to make a lot of like the nuanced choices, like the choice to make it, like more high fidelity style and more modern sounding. Like that was a decision that like didn't happen by accident. Like we could have made this whole shit super lo-fi. And there's a part of us that would have loved that because we love that sound, but, we decided we were pretty adamant about making it, loud and clean and crisp and modern, but still feeling warm and giving you the warmth of that period,
What about house music in general? Because you've obviously, we sort of talked about the trap era, which is where I think a lot of people first heard of Keys and Krates. And then from there, you moved on and expanded the sound pretty broadly, especially on something like Original Classic that we were talking about, where you were, really working with a lot of different sounds and styles. Yeah. What about house music? What about what's going on now, whether it's what's happening with house now or what's happening with your own ears, your interests? What led you guys to focus on house for this one?
I think a lot of it was giving us some parameters, because like if you leave us to our own devices, we will make original classic where there's like 10 different genres of music and every BPM range going on the album. And that's really dope. And it's like, not that we won't continue to make all those kinds of different records, but I think in terms of being like an act that's plays out and stuff, like I think we wanted to challenge ourselves to like stick to a BPM range, some different kinds of grooves and see what we could kind of do in it. Cause I think after we did the trap stuff, we kind of rebelled against that by doing like Ciara and original classic and stuff. And those albums were like just very like all over the place, in terms of like BPMs and styles. And it made it very hard to play and ascertain like what we were anymore as a live show. So I think house gave us like, and when we say house, it's like there's stuff on the album you could consider like, it's not just like straight house music, it's like dance music. But I guess if we're going to speak even just like super vaguely, like going 4 on the floor between 120 and 132 and exploring different grooves gave us like parameters to be like, okay, well, we know we're working within these confines, and then trying to find the freedom within those confines to explore all the different styles that we like and find our voice, find the kind of chords that we liked, find the feel that we liked. I think just giving ourselves, I think we needed those limitations, and it's made it a lot easier to play out, to play all this stuff out. Is everything's playable. Like the original classic was like, it was very hard to play a lot of those records. A lot of them needed edits. A lot of them just didn't end up working in the live setting. And this whole album is sort of playable. And that was like really important to us, that you could put the album on at home. I think that's always been important, that post-trap, I think post-trap, we really wanted our stuff to be able to be played at home by people, because we didn't have that in the trap era of our music. And I think we really wanted that. And I think we finally kind of nailed both, where it's like, that's now, you can put this on at home and it's like a fun listen, but we can also play it out. And that's like very nice. And I think confining us to house music really did do that, or, this BPM range, like whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
It's interesting to add to that too, though. When we started rebelling against trap, like we consciously took steps. If you go back and you listen to Ciara and original classic, we started putting 4 on the floor grooves on there, but they're in the 110 to 120 range, or the 100 to 110 range, because we knew we had to kind of ramp up to going from what we were doing into something else 4 on the floor. And so it was an interesting journey there, because I think personally, I enjoy that range a lot, the 100 to 120 range. There's a lot of freedom there to make a lot of interesting stuff. But when you go into that world, you make music there, you don't really exist in any other ecosphere. So we found that while we were making stuff there, when you go play it live, you're like, well, shoot, we don't have any songs to go around this to show the full picture. So while we have fans that love individual songs of those, we would have a problem putting together a 45-minute collective thing. So, and I think those 2 albums, though, had to happen for us to kind of understand the 4 on the floor groove. And as you see over those records, we slowly started speeding it up between those 2 records to get to where I think, if you see the bridge starting from Ciara to now, there is a road that shows that we're headed there. It just took 2 albums to it took 3 albums to go from trap stuff to full on this, and that was an interesting journey for us.
Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting point too, that I don't think always gets talked about is, we're making electronic music here at the end of the day. Right. And so we've got a laptop, we've got software, you can make anything you want. And obviously all of you guys are very talented musicians with varied backgrounds, and, it could go anywhere. And what Keys and Krates is, at least to me, it's you three meeting and the combination of your sounds and influences and all that. But it's all of that, I guess, is obvious. But to me, what's not obvious is what you're saying, Matisse, which is sometimes the key to any artistic endeavor is not the product itself, not the idea itself, because I think you guys as Keys and Krates, you've always sounded like Keys and Krates, but sometimes it's in how it's presented to people or how it's packaged or how it's framed even, for people to engage with it who might not know you personally or might not know your background. And it's sort of, what's the best delivery method, not just for people to appreciate a great album, which this is, but also to sort of understand your perspective and where you guys are coming from. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And for us, I mean, like we felt it like it was something you not only observed, but you felt it, because that first tour we did after when we decided to change directions and we were doing Cure and we were doing different things, you felt the audience not fully understand what you were doing, which, as any performer, it's almost like swimming against the current.
Yeah.
There's a part that just wants to I see what you want me to play and I want to do that because I want to make you happy, but I want to go over here, and then that's when we kind of learned, how difficult it is to kind of switch genres while you're staying the same name, because we could have switched to a different name and came up with some of the things, but we're like, no, we're going to stick with Keys and Krates. And then you're at shows and you're talking to fans, and some fans are like, I missed the old this and this. But then the cool thing is you at this tour we've been on, there's some fans who come up and say, I've been with you guys since the beginning and I love where you're going. And that actually, I never thought about that until a couple fans said it. And I really, when the fans that get it, you really appreciate them because they fully understand the scope. They've been along for the entire ride. And they're like, yeah, we love your old stuff, but we're down for this new stuff when we're here. And then this tour, we had to find a bunch of ways to remix our old songs that were trapped to turn them into house songs, which is another headache. We're still working on that, trying to just put it in how do we make sure we can go into this catalog we have that is so diverse and bring it up to date. And then that's a whole new lesson to figure out how to blend that texture and put it in. And, so you figure that all out by just being in front of the audience and the audience responding to you or not responding to you for the music. And you realize it's up to you. It's like you're a chef. You can serve dinner first, or you can do appetizers, and how you set it up is how people remember it and how much they enjoy the meal. So we've had to go through that with the ups and the downs, almost like telling a joke and figuring it out when the punchline should be delivered. Right. So that's been a very, very interesting journey for us. And I was telling Greg in San Francisco, I was like, I'm actually kind of proud of that, because I think it's very hard to go from what we've gone from to what we're doing now, from just and sticking with the same name and things like that.
Right.
And to see fans who were at the 2017 tour with Gladiator or something and playing the hardest 75 BPM drops to now they're coming out, they're 5 years old or 6 years old, and they're listening to groovy house music and they're still fans. I'm like that. I feel like that is something very unique, and I don't know, I don't know if it gets, I don't know how many other bands can do that, but it's something I feel is a testament to our abilities as producers to be able to take that journey and still be around.
Dude, it's hard to do. Was there ever, in that, when you were moving away from trap music, wanting to expand your sound, was there ever a thought of going the other way and being like, maybe we should just do a different project? Maybe we should start something else? Was that ever a thing when you were starting to figure out how to expand the sound?
I don't think we ever did.
No, I think we said it and sometimes I think in hindsight now we thought about would have been easier, but I think no, there was never really I don't think so.
Never talked about that. No, we never really.
I feel like a lot of, and I mean this with all love, but I feel like a lot of times you guys always pick the harder way.
Always.
That should be the statement.
That is our inside joke with a lot of our friends. It's like there's one way, but then there's a harder way, and that's the Keys and Krates way. Yes, but could it be done harder? Yeah.
So we like that. I don't know why it is. We just love the challenge. It's like, yeah, you want to try to turn a ship around? Let's try to turn it around.
I think, I feel like maybe it was a little oblivious. Like we thought, well, we're still making, like, we're the ones making the music. And we did this and like, we're still using 808s, we're still like, it's like you're like, I got there from here. Like you can get, here from there. And then you learn it's like, no, some people really can't. You're like, oh shit. Like I guess like it was obvious to me when I like stopped making burgers and started making pizza that like, because I like pizza and burgers, that you would like the pizza that I make. But you're like, there's some people that are like, I want the burger, right. And I get it. But I feel like we were oblivious. There was a little bit of like obliviousness to
also in our defense, though. I also think we didn't know we'd probably go this much to the how. Like I think when Ciara and Original Classic came out, the idea was to stick to that certain slow. At least for me, I thought the idea is we were blending kind of that trappier sound with more organic sounds. Like Ciara was very intentional, where we were dropping organic sounding stuff. We had some 4 on the floor stuff in the 100 to 108 with like Something Wonderful and things like that. And then we had like organic drops with like Flute Loop and stuff like that. And we were trying to go, we were rebelling against, like, we felt like everything in that scene was going so hard and so loud and so over the top. But we were like, let's just give something a bit more, palatable and to our ears. So we went there and we added in some dancier 4 on the floor. And that was based, I remember on that album, we were playing live a lot still. So I was always focusing on like, what can Tune play? Like, can we play this one live? Because that was a lot of times we used to, with the old stuff, we'd make it all in the machine, and then we try to play it live, and there'd be this like triple like kick thing that's just impossible to play. And so, I think in our defense, it just we didn't even think. If you had told me 5 years ago that we were making this album now, I wouldn't have believed you. I don't think it was even on my radar that this is what we would do. And personally, I really enjoy what we had attempted to do on Original Classic. I just think there's not enough of it in the ecosphere for it to own a lane. But I think for what we were trying to do, I'm like, it's kind of a really cool concept. So I think it was just what we were doing was we were always DJing during that time, so we couldn't actually stop Keys and Krates as well. We were always constantly touring, and I remember we were just going from like, oh, we're playing something at 105. Oh, let's go up to 1.9. Oh, let's go up to 112. Then we had some really uncomfortable stuff in the 116 era. We're like, we only have one song there. Right. And then so eventually we're like, let's just figure out how to get a bunch of songs at the same thing, so we're not like scrambling, Well,
and this is just a quick tangent off of that. I forget who I was talking to about this, but I think it's a good exercise for anybody, especially even like up and coming artists, if you're trying to figure out your sound or trying to figure out how it fits in, any of that. I think it's a good exercise to, try to, if you have a bunch of songs, make a mix of your own songs and see if you can put them together in a cohesive way and see what that because it will teach you some stuff that you might not have realized about your own work, about the way you make stuff as an artist. There's like, I think that's a great exercise for anybody, man, honestly.
Yeah. We failed that for years. That's how we got to here. It's like, we're like, finally we have an album that we can play. That's all one thing. And it's pretty cool.
Dude, it's great.
Yeah, I think it was like, we were trying things, Yeah. And by the way, like, I think like, we're not like trying to cast shade on any of those 2 albums. Like, we love that stuff. And like, we'll continue to I think making records like that, whether it be for like other people or whatever, but in terms of like our project that we're like playing out, it didn't totally nail it for us, what we were trying to do, as like being a live act and stuff.
Well,
Sorry,
and of course, and those albums are great, man. Yeah, it's to me, I think what we're talking about more is sort of like how it's all evolved. And I guess that maybe even goes back to the question of sort of how do you look at older work differently now versus when you make it? Because they're all great albums that you should absolutely be proud of. There's bangers on all those albums, but yeah, I think you look back at it as sort of a line and you see that, maybe it was heading in a direction that you may have not even realized,
I think we definitely wanted things to be groovier, right? Tune, would you say that? Like just groovier and more of like a less ragey thing and more of a, I don't know.
There's a maturing thing in the dance, right? Like,
no, I think the other albums are great. They're great listens. It's just, I guess, when it comes to playing them out, that's where the big difference is. Like, and this is just more focused.
Yeah.
When talking about the live stuff too, I know you guys are doing basically all DJ sets at the moment. Is that a firm thing? Like, is Keys and Krates for now at least a DJ act?
I think so. Yeah, like we're not opposed to bringing the live stuff back, but it just has to really make sense, like logistically. Like I think maybe for festivals or something, but we're not. We're more just focused on like making a ton of music and making like the music drive the demand. Because I think we hit a place where it was like the live show had to drive all of our demand. And then as a result, like we just weren't making a ton of new music. Like we were making music just enough for like a project. And then it was like, then we had nothing again. And because we were so enveloped with just like keeping up this live show and touring it and rehearsing it and all this stuff. So I like now that we have time to make new music and the shows, rather than being something that takes away from that, it's contributing to it. It's like a feedback loop between all the stuff we're working on, like Tune can make something on like a Wednesday and Matisse and I can like try the idea in the set and like text him and be like, this is working. This is not working. Let's rework this, and like and any of us can do that. And that's like super handy. Whereas, we used to, we'd make it, even if we made a new song, on the side from touring, we'd be like, when are we going to get to like have a week and a half to rehearse that to get that into the set? You know what I mean? To even try it, to see if it even works. So I think right now we're just enjoying like not making things super hard for ourselves, right. Like the traditional Keys and Krates thing where like every single, like we're at a dance festival and every single person's plugging in a USB and we're like, oh, we're just waiting to sound check.
Yeah.
Like,
we got these 14 custom bags that have to get it from the airport to the. It was just.
Fuck that.
Well, and that's part of it too, right? Because I think the making it harder on yourselves thing, there's a romance to it, and I'm sure some of that philosophy is why you are who you are, and why your music sounds the way it does. But then there is the opposite side of that where sometimes you can be like, well, wait, why does this part of it also have to be hard? And it's, I think it's a great feeling when you realize that you can make something easier on yourself, or you can simplify some part of your artistic process, and it will actually help you evolve, or it will, make something better in your process.
Yeah.
Yes, totally.
Also, I think there was this one show I remember where we were killing ourselves getting the rehearsals down and getting all the gear out to the show to play live, and we would spend so much time trying to get the timing of our stuff live. And we play the show live, whatever, on our music stuff. And there's like a DJ at the side goes, "That was a great show." And we're like, "Oh yeah, we really worked hard to get it played live." He's like, "Wait, you guys played that live?" And he's like, and we're like, no one even knew that we were a live band half the time we were up there.
Wow.
And I think they kind of taught us that we were kind of sweating the stuff that wasn't really making a difference to the person watching. And you kind of learn from that after a while, but
Yeah, or people would compare us to like other acts that were like, yeah, they had like live gear on stage, but they weren't really actually doing a ton. Like they were mostly playing over a track. And it was just kind of like people would just lump us in the same category as them. And I'm like, why are we even like, it's like, what are we doing here? It's like nobody even knows the difference between us and this other electronic act, because nobody really actually knows what's happening up there when it's an electronic act. That's like the reality of it.
That's true.
Like nobody knows who's doing what. Nobody knows what's coming from a track and what's actually happening live, unless it's super live. Like unless it's like a band where it's like, like fucking M83 or something, and they're singing and there's like tons of modular synths on stage and they're playing guitars and stuff. But if you're just playing like keys and like samples and you're doing and like drum triggers and stuff, like nobody knows what's happening. And just after a while, you're sort of like, fuck, man, I love the idea that people think we're different, but they don't even get that they don't even really understand all the work that we're actually doing,
For
That's
sure.
the real pain in the ass.
Dude, yeah. And I have to imagine too, I mean, some of it is just following the fun, right? Because all of you guys come from, live music backgrounds in one way or another. And at the start, I'm sure that was a fun connection, an exciting thing to be like, how do we combine these backgrounds to create this new thing, this hybrid? But at a certain point, just like anything else in life, you do something enough and, you can lose the fun of it, or something else becomes more fun or more interesting, a new idea, a new way to do something. And I think for what we do, you always should follow the fun. That's like always the correct artistic decision. But it's hard in the moment to be conscious of that when you're sort of locked into something that already has a presence and an identity. And so I don't know, man. I relate to that just because I think, sometimes you start something for the right reasons because it's fun and all that, and then at a certain point, it's almost like you don't even realize that your fun has gone somewhere else,
Yeah.
Right. You're just riding a wave. Like you started exactly what you said, you started for all the right reasons and the wave started and you're surfing. You're like, this is amazing. And then like a few minutes in, you're like, all right, this is cool. And then you're just still riding that wave, like there's a whole machine and infrastructure that we sort of built up around us. So it was like hard to, and it's like, it's also hard to like totally admit to yourself when it's like, you're not totally having fun because you're like, you're supposed to be having fun the whole time, it's a weird thing.
Yeah. I mean, that's a scary thing too, right? Like, it can be scary too, to sort of admit that, because if you admit that, then that means you have to change something. And with change comes, not only work and stress, but also, some uncertainty. It's like, this thing is already working. So there's always a little bit of just like, at least for me, a little bit of trepidation of like, if I change this, like, there's no guarantee it's going to work like it did before. That being said, though, I think the first time, I haven't gone back and listened, but I think the first time we did this podcast, I know we talked about sort of how the group came together and your individual backgrounds musically and all that sort of thing. One thing I'm not sure we talked about that I think is relevant to this new album is like your rave backgrounds individually. and so I'm sort of curious, again, broad open question, but if you think back to when you were kids or when you first heard dance music, became aware of it, got into it, like were you guys going to raves? What was sort of the scene like in Toronto when you were younger? What were some of maybe the first live events you went to that really turned you on as far as dance music goes, as far as house music goes? Like, do any early memories spring to mind as something that like you feel like really left an impact on you at that age?
For me, there's a couple things for me that stood out, because I never considered myself in the know of the raves and stuff like that. I was more of someone, again, just watching from the outside. It was always like I'd be in a nightclub and there'd be R&B and hip hop, and I'd be in that room with my boys. But then the small room to the side was playing this weird dance music, and the weird kids were in there. And some of the girls were cute in there, so I'd kind of go in there and try to pretend like I belonged. And so I'd just be in there for probably just a vibe. But then I recognized it was a world that I didn't understand, but it was something about that world that was very cool to me. And I remember that at like 15 or 16, particularly dating this one girl who she was more into it than I was. And I just remember being like, I didn't understand the culture around it at the time. I only knew hip hop and R&B, but there was a part of me that realized there's a culture here. It's weird, but it's real. And then mix that with, I used to always watch Electric Circus and fashion television. And I remember Electric Circus would always have those like top 5 songs from like Europe. And I didn't know what those songs were, but I wish I did because they look cooler than the songs that I knew. And I was like,
is Electric Circus, I think that's a Canadian thing. Is that like a countdown show?
It was a Canadian show. Okay. So it was a Canadian show. The host was Monica Diol. She was like the queen of the era. She was on, it was a Friday night party that would happen live inside the Much Music building, which was our MTV. And it was like basically like Soul Train, but in Toronto. And I lived in London, Ontario, which is like a smaller town. So we idolized everything in Toronto. So that was a Toronto thing. And you just saw all these cool people dancing. And that was the only place that I really got those kind of songs. I would hear those songs and I'd be kind of being spoon fed, like, what's the top 5 songs on this playlist? And then I would just be into, some of those songs would resonate for me here and there. And then I would go to a club in London, and sometimes there'd be a DJ playing, and I would just kind of I would like maybe 1 or 2 songs out of every 10, but I would be like, this is really cool, you know? And that's kind of how I look at it still. Like, I'm not really, I'm not someone who could tell you the history of house music, and I'm not like, oh, I'm not a house snob. I just like what I like. And I love the inclusive of the culture, and I like the craftsmanship of trying to make it sound good in a club and what happens at different times of the night when people are dancing to it.
I like that. Yeah. No, I totally relate to that. It's less about the specific sound and more about sort of the overall culture of it and the overall. I like that you focus on like the effect it has on people, which is an interesting, you were talking earlier, I think, Greg, you were saying that like at a certain point you moved away from like ragier music. And it's funny because we talk a lot about the genre or the exact style, but we don't always talk about sort of the way it actually affects people when they're hearing it, especially in the live set. Because it is like if you turn the volume down, if you could just like mute the festival, you could still tell what kind of music was playing, just by watching the behavior of the people. That's a funny thought. I never thought about that.
No, absolutely. And we think about that too, because I still love like rap music, I still love like trap music and all that stuff. Like, it's great, but like, it's not like necessarily the party I want to be at. I don't think that any of us really want to be at. So I think we're trying to make the music for the party that we would want to be at. I feel like we earlier reached a disconnect in that, then we rebelled and then it was like all this other stuff. But I think like this is us trying to be like, we're trying to make music for the party that like we actually want to be at. We still like stuff hitting hard, but we like a groovierness to it. But my experience with like rave and stuff came from being a turntablist, because like turntablists, there was like this thing where they would get booked at raves and stuff like that. A lot of times in the drum and bass room. Yeah. So a lot of the raves in Toronto that were happening in like the late 90s, early 2000s, that's when I was like at the pinnacle of my like battle DJ career. So I would get booked to like do showcases at these raves the same way like A-Track and Craze and the Executioners and all those guys would. So that was my first exposure to raves, and seeing like, especially like I would hear house music all the time at like the record stores. Like I would overhear it being played. I would buy it because I just naturally gravitated towards like strictly rhythm stuff and like nervous stuff. Cause it just, like the Armin stuff and the Masters at Work stuff sounded like it had a very hip hop approach to the production. So like, it was very easy for me to get into that. But like going to raves and like showcasing at raves and hearing shit like happy hardcore and like drum and bass in context like then called jungle, you know, or like Rotterdam or like, you know, and like what they would call like ambient music or the chill out room or like the, trip hop, then like all these different like weird subgenres that were going on in like the late 90s. That was kind of my exposure to it. And it was really, the raves were like very magical in Toronto because they eventually started doing them at more legit locations. But when they first started doing them, they were just at these warehouses that were totally illegal.
Yeah.
And they would have like, they would basically bus you there in like a school bus. So it just felt like crazy, you know, like it felt very janky. And even when they moved them into more legit venues, like I remember one of the raves I showcased at was at the Toronto Science Center, which was really crazy because you had all these ravers running around the Science Center with all the exhibits open and stuff. But then there's all these different rooms open and it was fucking wild. Like it was just insane to see. Like you're like, how is this happening here?
Yeah.
This is insane.
Yeah,
it just felt almost like as chaotic as when it was in the illegal warehouse. Like maybe more so because it's like, why is this here?
Dude.
This is totally insane.
That seems like it shouldn't be allowed. Just in terms of like, you have to imagine some raver high on something is like running into an exhibit and, you know, tearing it up.
You know what though? But Greg brings up a good point because I realized that was it too, is that you sensed immediately with that scene that there was just way more imagination with what they could do with a night versus what you were coming from R&B and hip hop. Like hip hop was just like, gonna put my hoodie on and go to the club or just like whatever. And you go to this like house thing and there's like flowers and colors and like people wearing like anything, you know, and like, and you're just like these, like, it was such, there's so many layers to the culture already that even if you weren't part of it, you were just like, this is something and it's beautiful in its own way. And I'm being like schooled on like how much more there could happen, you know, like when I look back at that studio, like I'll watch like documentaries on Studio 54, I believe it is in New York. And they show that there's like a horse inside the club and things like that. And like, I can't fathom that. I've never been in a club anywhere in Toronto where there was a horse inside, you know, and that whole era of that 80s time, you know, I think about that when I think about like house music and just the ridiculousness of what people will put up just to go along with that music compared to any other genre. Like I can't think of any other genre of music that goes to that extreme, you know. Festivals now do in general, but I feel like they all got it from rave culture and from that kind of thing, you know. And I think that's what, when you're an outsider looking in, you're just like, just looking at something that you're like, this is something, you know.
Yeah.
And there's an energy here and I might not understand it fully, but I feel it, you know?
Yeah. I mean, that to me, that makes me think about even, you know, the roots of house music. I mean, that kind of ethos is absolutely where it came from. You know, it was sort of a safe space and a free space for people who maybe couldn't be totally safe or free in the rest of their lives in multiple different ways. And I think that, you know, so then you go harder in the space where you are free and you can really just like no limits on the creativity, on the vibe, whatever it is. And you're right, man. It's cool that like that kind of energy or that kind of ethos, like that you saw that even just, you know, in your own life in Toronto in that era. Like it's kind of cool that even, you know, because obviously, like, not everybody making house music thinks about that ethos every time they make house music throughout decades of it. You know what I mean? But it's cool that sort of a spirit can sort of live on in a genre of music throughout different eras. I don't know. Just like, I guess the point is like intention matters when you make artistic choices. I guess that's the core of it.
Well, to speak to what you were saying earlier, I think now, you know, as we're talking to Stuart, I'm thinking probably the advantage the three of us really do have is that we have such a background in live music first. So you're in environments where it's all about the energy around it. And then from that, we became producers afterwards. So I remember listening to Lashik, Niles Rogers talked about that. He has an interview on Red Bull about that and how I think they're making a song for Janet Jackson or something. And the way he described how they produced a song is exactly the way I think about a song. Because he said, you know, he's producing the song thinking about how she's going to come out on stage to perform the song, right? And I think literally, I can speak for almost all of us. I think 90% of, like, when we're making music, we're always thinking about, like, it's like you're not even just making it for the song. You're thinking about where it's going to be played, you know, and the environment's going to play in and who's dancing to it and what time of the day it is. And so when you start with that idea and you start with just the live thing first, you get that's how you shape your entire thing. And, you know, Greg and I will talk about, like, oh, you know, we played an hour earlier tonight. The crowd responded better. And it's like, oh, we played at 5 p.m. This set sounded better. Like, we're very nuanced in understanding, like, oh, we went on too late tonight. This mix we just did needs to be played earlier in the day, you know, and understanding, like, just the nuances between playing at 10 p.m. versus midnight versus 4 a.m. And, like, it's so natural to us. But thinking about it from your side, yeah, I'd assumed everyone does that, but I don't know, you know. But for us, it's like we're very aware of what time we're on at, if we're playing for 90 minutes to, you know, 2 hours, things like that, you know, if it's, you know, all that stuff. And I think we just came up in that environment that the music and the room it's in and the people in there go hand in hand. They're all one part of the same energy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. And it's funny, too, talking about, like, what time you go on. I think anyone who's been a performer long enough has that experience too, where sometimes, yeah, whether it's, you know, yeah, we went on too late or whether the crowd is just tired by the time we got there. Like, I'm sure you've had that experience where you just go on and it's not any mistake that you make and it's not really anyone's fault, but there are certain gigs, not often, but every once in a while, where you just get on and within 5 minutes, you're like, this isn't going to be the one, you know, like, this is just, there's no matter how good I do, this isn't going to be the show.
Yeah.
That's like, I guess that's like bombing for a comedian, where it's just
that's like lesson 101. Yeah. It's like, you just, you that's you earning your chops and paying your dues and stuff, you know? And,
yeah.
I mean, like 4 a.m. in North America is very different from 4 a.m. in Europe, you know?
Yeah.
Like when we play Barcelona and like we'd like play 3:30 in the morning, and that was like the equivalent of playing midnight here. You know, like people were they were at their peak then. Whereas, like, I don't know, like people try and do later stuff here. I find, like, when you get past like the 2 a.m. mark here, it's just like people get pretty zombie-ish, you know, unless it's like the real after hours crowd. And even that, it tends to end up having a little bit more of like an after hoursy kind of a vibe to it. So I just think there's cultural differences with the set times, I think. You know?
Yeah, for sure. I think the demon hours is very much a thing in the US in a way that it isn't, or in Canada as well, North America, like in a way that it isn't in Europe so much, because they just have that culture of being out all night is a very normal thing, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
And here, like North America, you have to choose to get yourself in trouble, you know, like you have to put in a little work to really push it like that.
Yeah, exactly. That's interesting.
Well, Toon, you have any raving background, raving memories?
I mean, mine's similar to Matisse's. Like I was actually in London as well. Like I had gone to a couple of like jungle raves in London, which were really small because it was like small version of Toronto stuff. But yeah, I really wasn't. I listened to a lot of dance music because I was going to the clubs at the time. So like late 90s, more on the, I guess, commercial side of house was kind of my experience. And maybe, but I mean, when I went into the raves, I was kind of like, this is not my scene. The music's cool, but I mean, I just didn't really, I didn't understand it, you know, like I do now. I wish I had.
Right.
Like the stuff in Toronto that Greg was talking about, like if I could only go back and, you know, call the phone numbers that they would, you know, let you know the location to be at, like that shit would be amazing. But yeah, not really.
Yeah. But there's something to that too. I think hearing the music, appreciating it. I don't know. I bet that gives you an interesting sort of subconscious perspective to go back and make it decades later too, where it was like you were saying, you wish you had gone. I don't know. Maybe this is too much of a reach, but like now maybe some of what you're making is that feeling. You know, it's like
100%. Like the whole time that we were making this, I'm like, this feels so natural. Like this is like you know, late 90s me going out to the club stuff. Like the references were there. You know, I feel like actually like I was using a lot of these references between, you know, when I started making stuff, and it just the time didn't fit until like the 90s influence came back in. I'm like, okay, now some of my choices are actually making a little bit more sense now, you know, which is interesting. It's like it's come back in fashion. It's like grabbing your, you know, clothes.
Absolutely.
If you hold them long enough, they become fashionable again, you know?
I mean, it's so weird for me as someone who sort of became even aware of fashion in the late 90s, early 2000s. Not that I was super fashionable at that time, but it's weird to see, I don't know if you guys have this, but it's weird to see those trends come back around because for me, I'm like, well, I can't wear that now because like that's what I wore 20 years. That's like, if I wear that now, I think I would just feel like that awkward younger version of me. You know, like I'm kind of like, for me, I'm like, well, it's not cool to me anymore to do it. Like it looks good on everybody else who's doing it now, but there's something, I have a block, man. I can't go back to that place.
That's funny.
Yeah.
I feel like I still dress like a teenager, so I don't know. I feel
You've
like
just been consistent the whole way through.
I don't feel like I really evolved into adulthood in terms of dressing.
Well, I mean, to a certain extent, what we do is a way for all of us to pretend that, you know, we're not aging, right?
Yeah. Totally.
But to talk a little bit more about the album before we get out of here, I did want to ask, you know, looking at it more specifically, a couple tracks on there. Working with Ciara on the track Fantasy is just a crazy thing to do in general.
Yeah.
Talk to me about, this is more of a standard interview thing, I guess, but like, just talk to me about that track. How did that happen? Because that's, out of all the link ups that you could have done, that's just a crazy one to do.
Yeah. We started this idea, basically, we started like this song idea, which was like the idea for that song with a vocalist. We kind of had the guts of it. And we were talking about putting somebody else on it. And we've always loved like working with artists that have like never done dance records before. Like that's like our thing. And we love like R&B singers. Like that's a big thing. And we also love like working with like emerging talent or maybe talent that feels like it's a little like slept on or like a cool reach, like somebody that not everybody's working with, like somebody that everybody's working with at the moment is not truly exciting to us.
Right.
So those are some things to kind of know about where the choice comes from. And then I think when we had this idea, like Ciara was actually like a reference point because the writer, like the initial writer that we worked with on the tune has that tone, like has kind of a Ciara tone. So like we were sort of using Ciara as like a centerpiece of like the tone that we were after. And then we were making like a list. And we ended up talking to somebody through our management who was like trying to link us up with some different collabs. And we were telling him about the Ciara reference. We're like, and he was like, oh, I actually know Ciara. And like, I could put this in front of her. And we were like, oh, that's crazy. Like, we didn't really expect that. So we sent her over the idea. And then she ended up like, just like really loving it. And she wanted to cut it and finish it with us. And that's kind of how it happened. It was a lot of back and forth, and like there was stuff that changed from the original demo to like when we finished it production wise. And there was some stuff about the original demo that we changed, and then she wanted us to bring back. And like, there was this whole like kind of like back and forth like that. But we eventually like got it to a place where everybody was happy with it. But we just, I don't know. That's like doing a record with Ciara to me just feels so us to me, at least.
Yeah, I
like
love
doing a house record with Ciara, feels so us,
yeah. No, I love it too, man. And it is one of those things where you hear it and it makes a lot of sense immediately when you hear it, but it's like coming up with the idea to do it in the first place, I think that's a you guys thing. And it makes total sense. What was the conversations with her like? Because as you mentioned, she's, hasn't really done dance records like this, or at least exactly in this way. So was there, how much conversation do you have, period, as far as like, this is what we're going for, this is what we were thinking about, influences any of that? Or is it more just of like, it's more about she likes the idea, so you just focus on the idea? Like, how does that play out when you're actually working on the record?
I mean, Tune, I don't feel like we talked about like the justification for every musical influence in the record. Like, I don't think we talked about like why we're using almost like techno kind of industrial drums with M1 pianos, like we weren't, necessarily getting that specific with her, but I think, she was definitely after something. Like, she was definitely after the record feeling a certain way for her, and her feeling like she really belonged on the record, and it wasn't like her just trying to do something and appropriate something. Like, she wanted it to really feel like a legit Ciara house record, like those two things coming together organically. And it was like really important for us for the song to feel like that to us as well, and for the song to feel like that to her. Like, it needed to feel really natural to everybody. So we just worked on it until it was there. Like, we made every revision until we got it to a point that everybody felt like this feels natural, this feels great. Because it had to. I mean, it's her first house record, and like, we don't want her to feel like, not amazing about that. And also us, like, we don't want to do a bad house record with Ciara.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, we don't like, that's not like, we'd rather not do the record, So I think there was a lot of back and forth, and she is very specific. And she's really particular. And I think every really good artist is, they know how they want to sound, and they're like, they have an identity, and they want to make sure they're like upholding that. And like, we love that and respect that. And although it's like, it's challenging to work with, it's worth it. Like, the reward is definitely worth it.
It's crazy she hasn't done a dance record before. Like, if you just asked me off the cuff, has Ciara done a house record? I'd be like, yeah, probably. You know what I mean? Like,
you would think so.
Yeah.
She's been definitely remixed.
Right.
Definitely sampled.
Yeah.
But she's never done her own record, right? What were you going to say, Tune?
No, I forget.
Oh.
No, I think it was just, it was to do with the demo stuff. Most of it was with that. Like, like when you're demoing songs or stuff, you intend on changing by the end. But once you start working a vocalist into it, it's like those changes become harder to change because, that you want to change the kick, and like that clap isn't working, but I'll get to that later. But then once somebody else gets into the mix, those things are kind of, so it was like a balancing act of keeping stuff from the demo that, resonated with her when she heard it. But then also, like, sonically, there's just some sonic things that, we just wanted to change so it felt cohesive with the rest of our project, and I think that's where a lot of the balancing act came from with her.
Yeah. Well, you pulled it off, man. I love that too. And another one I really liked, another one of my favorites, was the track Overdrive. And there was something about that it kind of connected for me the evolution of Keys and Krates, because it kind of hits, again, just speaking for myself, there's this like wistful party vibe. It's like a party with emotions, you know what I mean? Like it's, and there's something about that I think is a through line in a lot of your guys' music over the years, that sort of, regardless of the energy of it, there is kind of, whether it's an emotional vibe or a nostalgic vibe or something, which I don't know, probably just goes into, you know, like specific artistic choices you're making in the arrangements and that sort of thing. But anyway, I really like that track and wanted to talk about it just because I felt like it was, for me, kind of like a quintessential Keys and Krates track. Like if, you know, someone's like, I want to get to know this group in a few tracks, I think that's one that I would play for them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you feel that way, but yeah.
No, I definitely do. Like, we were talking a lot about how difficult it was to kind of get emotion, like the emotion that we're used to putting into house grooves. Like you said, there's certain rules and there's certain boundaries that come with each genre of music. And for some reason, is really difficult to get a certain type of chord progression or emotional feeling in house music, you know? And we must have made a million demos with lots of melodic changes and stuff. We're just like, this doesn't sound like it fits and it sounds like something else, you know? But that one, when we play at the shows, there's another layer of feeling that you see people, they close their eyes and it comes on and they're partying with that feeling rather than just like, there's a different way they dance to some other ones, you know? And there's a beauty to that one. The lift in it is a lift, but it's still kind of mellow at the same time.
Right.
You know, and her vocals are in such a beautiful range and the way they echo out is just, it does feel very, I think there's something new that we did there with that track in terms of kind of like finally getting to be like a Keys and Krates track for dance music, but still has that melodic thing that we used to have in all of our early music. But I really enjoy that one.
Yeah. No, that's a good way to put it. I mean, I think you guys really threaded the needle on that one in terms of, bringing together all of those pieces. Oh, I wanted to talk about this as far as the new album, that it's coming out with Last Gang Records, which kind of has a crazy pedigree as far as, you know, we keep sort of talking about like where you came from and where you're at now. And Last Gang, to me, especially in that early blog era, was super influential and has a crazy pedigree, launched a bunch of artists we still talk about and reference to this day. What's the significance there? Like, how did you come to work with them? What does Last Gang mean to you guys?
I think they're Toronto. I think it felt good to do, like, we started working with them on Original Classic and it felt good to work with them because they work with like acts, you know, they're not like just like a dance label, but they kind of are a dance label in a way. They aren't a dance label, but they started kind of as a dance label, but more of a dance label that really had like real acts. So it felt good for us to work with them, like from an album perspective, I think. And they're just good peoples, man. They're like good Canadian folk. And they really care about us and the projects and stuff, and have just tried to be super helpful, I think, the whole way. So it's cool we worked with American labels before and no problem with that. I'm sure we probably will again, but it was nice to work with like a Canadian crew, you know, and do that thing. Yeah.
No, I hadn't even realized that you guys had done Original Classic with them as well. So that makes sense to keep it rolling. Yeah. Is it crazy too? I mean, this is a different thing, but Greg, you were talking about like the classic house labels you fell in love with originally. Is it weird that you guys have a record with Defected now? That seems like a crazy thing to check off the list as far as like, older influences that come full circle.
It's very cool. We have a record too in the new year with Nervous also, crazy. Which is which is cool. So yeah, I mean, that's a whole other avenue that we haven't like totally even taken the lid off exploring. It's just like doing fun little singles with different, labels, and I'm sure we'll do that too. Yeah, I think we definitely want to put more like singles out after this. Like, I think we're all kind of like good on the big projects right now, and like we'll, I'm sure, eventually work towards another one. But I think like, yeah, we're excited to kind of do more singles and just put them in different places and have fun with that,
I love it, man. Was finishing up this album, obviously it was hard, I'm sure, and a lot of work. Was it harder, or did it feel different from finishing up other albums that you've done?
I don't know if it was any harder than other albums. Like, they're all kind of, they all have their own things about them. Like, there's always the nervousness of like, now you have a date. Like the way we kind of work, like a lot gets done before the date, but nothing really gets done as well. Like, we go explore. We have like 10,000 demos, of things. And it's like, it's not until the label's like, okay, so the release date is November 10th. You're like, okay, so now we know we have to deliver it, however many months before that. And that's the date. So everything is just kind of going towards that date. And it's like the stuff that feels like the most cohesive and the best album, a month before that is what's going to get finished. And then we kind of put those together. And then that's always a little bit of the stress, is like the month before delivery. It's like this thing has to feel, at least to us, because we're fans of albums, it has to feel like a real body of work. It's not just like a collection of like songs that have been finished, mixed, and mastered from like 6 months ago. And like this one's from 2 weeks ago, and you just put them all together and then put them in an order and put them out. That's not really how our workflow is. It's like no songs are really done until everything gets finished together and then molded together. So, I mean, that stress, I used to think that we're just like, that, we need to like get ahead of this and do it earlier and earlier. But I'm just realizing like that's our process. It's never going to change. And it actually works for us. And it makes the whole thing, at least to me, I think these guys as well, just feel cohesive. And like, it is really of the time, like there's no songs on there that feel dated, because they're actually from, right now. Like, this is the best that happened like a month before.
I think that's great, man. I think that's some of my favorite albums are the ones where you can tell it is kind of like a time capsule, and it's sort of capturing a moment, whatever that moment is. I think some of the best bodies of work are made that way, man. I totally relate to that.
Yeah. Maybe not the idea. The initial ideas can be from other times, but definitely the finishing and, the way the whole thing sounds and comes together.
I feel like 85 to 90% of it happened from January to August, though, which is pretty like, it's weird. It was like the shortest amount of time we've probably ever taken to make a project. And yet I didn't feel stressed at all during it. Like at this, and like, I didn't feel like we were backed up against the wall, or like we didn't have enough stuff, or like everything kind of just happened. And, I think it was probably the most at ease and good I felt about finishing a project. Like I felt like everything was, on a good path at all times, which was great.
Yeah, it is also this is only our third album.
Yeah.
Like all the time that Keys and Krates have been together. So, which I didn't think was weird, but when I talk to other people, they're like, this is the third, like you guys have only done 3 albums. And so like, I think now we're just getting to the point where we're like, okay, we know how it goes. And like, we feel comfortable with it. But
yeah.
But that's part of the hybrid thing too. I think maybe that would be weird for like a straight up rock band or something. But if it was a DJ, I don't think that would be weird, So it's, maybe it's somewhere in between. And I mean, maybe as a way to wrap this up, or at least start doing that, One thing too, Greg, you were saying this was like the most at ease you felt, which is amazing. And I think it's also worth mentioning that this far into the project, it seems like at least that like all of you guys are still not only working well together, but like you still actually like each other and you're still friends and like maintaining those relationships. It sounds like an obvious thing, but I think is actually very hard to do in a long-term artistic collaboration. And just in general, I mean, have you guys found any secrets or just anything to keep yourselves like happy working together and collaborating well and, being able to enjoy each other as people as well as artists and still make a good product? Is there any alchemy in there?
I know you're just waiting to say the joke there, but he's like,
no, I'm not going to
like each other.
This is where normally I would, this is me changing. I'm not going to say a dad joke here. I'm not going to say. Yeah. Actually, two things. I think like us communicating more and more like throughout the years, like I think that's been super important to like us staying together and all on the same page. But also I was thinking about the other day, none of us have ever said like, I'm quitting the band. Like, how like you always have those things. It's like we've always just kind of like the focus has always been there, and we've always just had the eye on our career being long, and I think that's just, and we all work really hard, and I think none of us want to see any of us work harder than the other, so that keeps us all motivated, and throughout the years, that's kind of what's, we don't have anybody that's just like, been on some bender for like two.
Yeah, who's the dead weight in the group? Let's figure that
out. This has turned into a full-on therapy session. Therapy session.
No, sorry, Greg. I had talked to someone about that as I've listened to other bands talk about their horror stories, and I think what we got lucky with was all three of us have tremendous pride in like not letting the other ones down. And none of us have had none of us have been like, an alcoholic or, left the group because of a girlfriend or something. Like we're just guys who I think we all share the same kind of blue collar, just roll up your sleeves and get to work and let the work speak for itself, and I think because of that, the arguments that we have are just stuff about personalities and styles. And then as long as you get to the point where you are able to yourself hear someone say something to you that you may not want to hear, but take that in and be like, okay, well, they're saying it for a reason. How can I adapt to make this thing better? Then you're able to keep the culture, of the band healthy. And I think we all just naturally somehow got lucky with that ethos and our mentality that we all just have that thing. So even if when we have the big heated arguments that you have when you're a band and you whatever, at some point when it all comes together, there's a sense of, oh, let's figure this out. We're in this together. We don't want to whatever. And that's always been there from day one, and from what I understand, it seems to me that's the one thing that I can say that separates us from other bands, that there's usually someone in the band that doesn't share the same mindset. And then at some point it blows up.
Right.
And then there's resentment that fills in. We don't really let resentment stick around for too long. At some point, it's going to come up to the surface and get that out there, and it leaves that, and we all know each other so well now that you're just like, oh, that's just Greg, or that's just Toon, or that's just Matisse. So you shrug off the stuff, and you don't sweat the small stuff, and, we all show up and we all want to win.
We're all like open to changing, and we're all open to being wrong. I think that's like a big thing. Like nobody's too... everybody's open to hearing, a different perspective, I think. And that's very key, I think, with us. And so I think we've all naturally grown and matured as like humans and adults. And I think our communication has gotten tighter because of that, and more specific and better. And I think with that, it becomes a lot easier to stick together because, you're just on the same page. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, of course. And the fact too, I'm sure like you're still, it seems like you guys are still on the artistic path, right? It's not like you're just sort of, cranking the machine to keep the whole thing going. Like you're still exploring new sounds and you're still carving.
Maybe more than ever before.
Yeah, totally.
It feels
cool,
like we're
man.
just starting. Yeah, it feels like we're just starting. Yeah.
I
It feels like
that.
there's less of a machine than ever and more of it's just us and the music, and how well we're able to just execute on the music, that's like everything.
Dude, I mean, we were talking about, reducing as an art form earlier, but I think the same can be true in a career, right? It's like, let's pare away all the extra noise in the career. And what are we left with? And how does it feel when we just focus on that? And yeah, man, that's a really good note that I don't always talk about. It's like, yeah, you can do that in a song, but you can also do that in your life,
Totally. Focus on the stuff that you want to be good at and like just do that like hell and block out all the other noise, Something's going to happen.
That's very true. It will happen.
I kind of love that. I feel like that's a pretty good note to wrap it up on. I mean, is there anything else we should say about the album, which is excellent and is out by the time people hear this?
Just that we're on tour still. We still got a bunch of dates coming up. So go to our Instagram. That's where we're the most active. You can also go to our website, keysandcrates.com, is it? I think I haven't been on it so long.
.org, actually.
.org?
.edu?
.ca, whatever. Yeah.
Great.edu.
Yeah. Go to Instagram. Let's say that. And, we might be coming to your town and come see the new set. It's a lot of fun. The album's coming out. When does this air?
Midnight.
Midnight.
Yeah, this will air after the album's out. I think we're dropping it next week. I think next Tuesday, I believe.
So the album's out now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go check it.
Absolutely.
Go listen now.
Well, hey man, I love you guys, man. It's really great to see you and to
likewise.
catch up. And I hope it's not too long before we get to hang out in person again.
Yeah, man, for sure.
Man.
Great talking to you guys. Thanks for taking the time.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having us, man.
All right, guys. Take care. Talk to you soon.
Later.
Peace.
Bye.